Hello there, and welcome to the channel. So, small confession, because I want to give this discussion for today some context. My folks had 4 children. The oldest is super smart. So, whenever we thought of the oldest brother, we always thought of the best at everything. He's the best at everything. And then my brother John came along, and when he was really tiny, he had to spend time in the hospital. So Mother felt a particularly protective instinct about him. And that translated because for a long time, for 10 years, Mom and Dad thought those 2 boys were the only children they were going to have. But it turns out they were going to have 2 more. I came along 10 years later. Brian came along 6 years after that. So there were almost 20 years between the oldest brother and the youngest brother. When we got a little bit older, I used to say that John was Mother's favorite. Now, a lot of people would say, oh no, parents don't have favorites, or you're just teasing him. She loved all of you kids. Your folks loved all of you kids. All of that is true. That's true. But Mother and John were very, I guess the best word for it is copacetic. They had a lot of shared qualities, and they sort of meshed well. They would play Scrabble together. They liked to visit. They liked to tell stories. And it really made Mother very happy when John would show up. Of course, when John showed up, it made everybody happy, which when you're his little sister is very upsetting because, you know, he's this big star. Of course, when Dean showed up, everybody paid attention to him because he was the best at everything. And when Brian came around, he was the cutest. He was the baby. He was darling. So, me being a column, I always had a chip on my shoulder, and I was always certain I wasn't pretty enough or good enough, and so I was constantly being wounded. Now, why do I bring this all up? Well, here's the thing. When you get training as a teacher, they talk about different developmental stages and different types of needs, and you get some psychological training so that you're prepared to deal with the developmental stages of students you'll be working with. But you only get it in the most basic sense. And I think that the family environment of a child coming into secondary school is really potently important because young people's first understanding of jealousy is the jealousy of sibling rivalry. And if they don't have siblings, they'll be jealous of other things. They'll be jealous. It's amazing. Children will even be jealous if their parents are like hugging. A child will sometimes want to get right between them. So the earliest experiences of wanting to be loved, of course, wanting to be admired, come when you're little. And so when you enter the secondary age, the age that you are in secondary school, all of those initial instincts for wanting love and wanting attention enter a more subtle and vast environment. And because of that, students or young people who've had a difficult childhood can sometimes manifest those difficulties in the classroom in really subtle ways that sometimes it's hard for teachers to pick up on. It's hard for their peers to pick up on, and it's hard to know what the best way to deal with that is. And I'll give you an example. Divorce is very common in our society. Remarriage is very common in our society. which complicates sibling rivalry and complicates the feeling of being loved for some young people. Some young people are less sensitive to these changes and these complications in their family dynamic. But some children are hypersensitive to them. And so when they begin their transition into adulthood, they're already carrying ideas and feelings that make them particularly sensitive to things they probably shouldn't be super sensitive to, that they need to learn not to be sensitive to, so that they're not constantly in pain. And when I say pain, I mean emotional or psychological pain. So when I would say, as an adult woman, that John was Mother's favorite, part of what I was saying was, and I'm okay with the fact that she and John got along particularly well, that they were uniquely suited to each other. Their personalities suited each other. And the thing is, neither she nor my brother could necessarily change that reality, and they didn't need to. We forget, because we live, so many families now have so few children, it's easy to forget that there was a time period when 10 and 11 children in a family would be common. And in these large families like this, little alliances between brothers and sisters and little personality clusters form, and a lot of learning to cope with wanting to be loved and needed gets confronted from that early stage. But because we have much smaller family now, those confrontations come in the secondary school stage. So, for teachers, it's important to remind yourself every once in a while, many of these students may have family situations that are particularly thorny. And I want to keep my sensitivity going when I'm around my students, because if they have a difficult or traumatizing home life, they may seek in a teacher the kind of comfort that many young people get from parents or grandparents. And that need, there's nothing wrong with them having that need. It's not even necessarily wrong to seek a teacher that will be supportive and loving in the way you might want a parent who's either absent or unable to provide that. The problem comes because there have to be lines between teachers and students, and especially those that don't have any familial relation. If you are not a member of the family and you don't have access to the information that's in that family, then you're as likely to make a misstep as you are to do the right thing. So when considering your relationships with students and the way you're perceived in the school, that's something to keep in mind, that students who may not express themselves very clearly at first may become intensely attached to you. And you have to be prepared to help them through that attachment if it's transitory. And you need to be able to let that attachment exist without letting it become unhealthy. And that's a really subtle thing to do. And luckily, it only gets complicated about once in every 200 to 500 kids. But unfortunately, you're going to teach thousands. So the complicated situations are going to happen. You just have to prepare yourself to try to keep the right amount of attachment there without wounding a young person's development. How do you do that? Well, that's a good question. And I'll probably tell a story or two about that in the coming weeks, especially on Fridays, about special situations where students become attached and how you try to help them through that. I don't think that's very valuable. What I did today, I'm sorry, this episode is difficult because I'm really soldiering my way through this because I think maybe it's super important, but I can't try to deal with it all in one episode. They've got to be short. And I think we need to think about them in between times. At least I do. I need to think about the things that happened and are happening and continue to happen, even in my adult life, that teach me about this idea of admiration, love, recognition. That's it for today. I hope you have a glorious rest of the day, and I hope you see me again. You gorgeous people.